今年是中美建交40周年，在现在中美的这种大环境下，您对中美未来的关系有什么展望，或者有什么建议？
短期呢，我比较悲观，这个长期我乐观了。两国呢共同利益很多，早晚要重新发现这一点。那么我想中国方面，最重要的是，他要维持过去美国创造的国际体系，对他有利。美国要是撤出来的话，是美国的错误，中国不应该犯同样的错误。就这样。
谢谢您。
谢谢。
About the state of the State Department, your appraisal.
You can smell the despair from 50 meters outside. I don't go there. It is an organization that is in a serious state of decay. A lot of positions, key positions, are not staffed. And frankly, I don't know how to put this, but two tankers were struck in the Strait of Hormuz, as you may know. Earlier today, Secretary of State Pompeo issued a statement which is described as a government assessment. Those of you not in Washington may not understand that that is not an intelligence community assessment. That is a political judgment. So we have jumped to the conclusion that Iran did this, even though there's no conceivable motive for Iran to have done it. And there are motives for many others who wish to provoke conflict with Iran to have done it. And I'm sorry to say that this pattern of, which probably began most notoriously with Lord Colin Powell testifying in the Security Council about weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, that might fall into the hands of terrorists who also didn't exist until we got there and created them. This pattern does not elevate American prestige and influence internationally. And it also reflects a contempt for foreign opinion, which is quite contrary to the way we were founded as a country. The Declaration of Independence begins with a recitation that we should have a decent respect for the opinions of humankind. And empathy, to go back to your theme, Noel, is central to diplomacy. You cannot persuade someone else that it is in their interest to do things your way unless you can persuade them, unless you understand where they're coming from and how to push that button. I don't see much evidence that we are cultivating those arts. Now, there is a very good article in the Great Decisions booklet by a colleague Nick Burns, which talks about the state of diplomacy, probably in less stark terms than I would, because he's more diplomatic than I am, but very realistic. In the back.
Sir, how do you foresee the execution of soft power from China as its global role expands? You mentioned that their approach is diffident and that they're disinterested in influencing others, but in what way do you see their influence expanding in that sense?
Well, they're very interested, the Chinese are very interested in soft power as a concept. It's actually a rather peculiar concept. It's an American concept. And if you think about it, it's based on the assumption that the only real power there is hard power. In other words, if you don't have brass knuckles on, you've got no ability to persuade anybody to do anything. That's obvious nonsense. But anyway, soft power is a reality. It is the ability to appeal, to make others want to do things that please you, to admire you, to emulate you, to follow you. And it's very important. The Chinese emphasize that. They're spending a lot of money on expanding their reach abroad, information about China, explaining their viewpoints and so forth. All true. I think they're going to get not very far with this. And the reason for that is, first of all, they have an extremely unappealing political system. It is occasionally guilty of true outrages like the Xinjiang surveillance state that is now in force. That means that in a significant part of the world, it's not going to have any appeal. Now, there are other parts of the world where raw power is more respected and sought after. In those cases, people will be looking to China for lessons. But they won't get any help from China in exporting its system. It really isn't interested in doing that. I think the Chinese secretly don't believe that foreigners can become Chinese. And they're just as happy not having them try. So they're very different from us in that regard. We are very messianic. We insist that you conform to our ways if you're going to be our friend. The Chinese make no such demands. That gives them a big edge in international business because they don't have political conditions or moral conditions attached to transactions. Maybe wait for the mic.
Thank you for being here with us, Ambassador President. Given the economic ties between China and North Korea, how does this downturn in U.S. and China relations have any effect on Trump's denuclearization dialogue with North Korea?
Well, the Chinese have a strong interest in a non-nuclear Korea for obvious reasons. It's their neighbor. And also because if North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is permitted indefinitely to retain nuclear weapons, that is likely to encourage others in the region to develop nuclear weapons, including perhaps Taiwan, which is, a nuclear civil war is not anything the world needs to see. And even Japan, on occasion, has flirted with the idea. So I think there's no doubt about the Chinese willingness to cooperate on the nuclear front. However, they have an overriding interest, which, after all, 1 million Chinese perished to preserve North Korea as a buffer state between them and U.S. forces in South Korea. They want stability in Korea above everything else. And they are not sympathetic to maximum pressure aimed at regime change in North Korea. So we have a difference there. And I always thought we were making a mistake when we, instead of talking to the North Koreans, our basic posture was, we won't talk to you until you come out with your hands up. That is not an effective approach. And there was always, I thought, in that context, it was a mistake to try to outsource diplomacy to China because its interests are not the same as ours. It shares the interest in denuclearization, but it puts a higher priority on stability than we do. The economic relationship is important mainly because North Korea doesn't have important economic relationships with anybody else. From the Chinese point of view, it's insignificant. North Korea is a small economy, it struggles. And I was very, very interested to see some commentary on the Chinese internet today, earlier, about a film that Huawei made with children singing about how wonderful Huawei was. The Chinese netizens, as they call themselves, the people on the internet, said, my God, this is disgusting. It's just like North Korean propaganda. Get rid of it. There's no love lost there. Yes.
Excellent speech today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the most interesting conflicts involving China is going on now. It would be hard to imagine one of every 7 or 8 of us on the streets facing police with tear gas and rubber bullets shooting at us. But that's exactly what's happening in Hong Kong. Can you talk a little about what's at stake there?
Hong Kong, I don't know how many hundreds of times I've been in Hong Kong. I always thought when 1997 approached and Hong Kong was to revert to Chinese sovereignty from British rule. By the way, the Brits never installed democracy in Hong Kong, so they had 140 years to do it and get around it. I always thought it was more likely that Hong Kong was going to take over China than the other way around, and in many ways it did. I mean, the whole commercial culture and even the language. If you speak Mandarin, it used to be a Bangalore. Now it's a Xiezhe. That's Cantonese. Anyway, basic office building. Basic terms have been infiltrated. So the influence has been enormous. What has not been an influence, the Chinese have successfully kept Hong Kong's freedoms and self-rule out of contaminated from the system. That's pretty remarkable. When Freedom House and others do ratings of societies, they just did one. The freest society, the most successful economic society on the planet is Singapore, having displaced us. Second is Hong Kong. We're number 3. So Hong Kong continues to enjoy a lot of freedom. Among the freedoms it enjoys is, in the Chinese phrase, gang ren zhi gang. Hong Kong people should run Hong Kong. But what Hong Kong people means is Hong Kong oligarchs, fat cats. And what these guys, their distinguishing feature, some of them are my friends, so I probably shouldn't say this, but their distinguishing feature is that they're expert at preemptive communication. They intuit what they think Beijing might want or should want, and then they offer it. And the extradition law, which is the subject of the riots, apparently originated in Hong Kong, not on the mainland. So this is a hard thing. Nobody's ever tried one country, 2 systems before. Actually, there are 3. There's one part of China that's run by sheltered natives. And if Taiwan ever reunites with the mainland, they'll be forward. Nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever run a country of 1.4 billion people before. So it's very disturbing. I have a feeling that in the end, people will come to their senses and back off on both sides. I don't know. Yes?
In your 2012 book, Interesting Times, you pointed out how the United States was able to establish relations with China because they put aside their differences in values and beliefs and just focus on the balance of power with the Soviet Union. And then you indicated that after 1989 Tiananmen Square, Americans tended to focus more on, they cared too much about the people. They started focusing on whether the human rights in China, and that as if we should have just focused on the balance of power. And now it seems that the foreign policy is shifting more toward balance of power. Don't interfere with countries. Just if they have different ways of doing things, just let that go and focus on the balance of power. Could you kind of describe how the foreign policy has evolved in those terms?
Nixon and Kissinger really were quite un-American in their focus on European balance of power as a model for international relations, and they very successfully applied the lessons of Kissinger's doctoral, I guess it was maybe it was an undergraduate dissertation, A World Restored. It's a great book about European balance of power and Metternich and so forth. And one of the main lessons in it is that after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the victors made the decision to invite the defeated, France, into the Council of Europe, the Concert of Europe, become a participant in managing Europe, and thereby pull the fangs of the French Revolution and tame France. And indeed, that gave the world, that gave Europe about 100 years of peace. We made a mistake after World War I. We excluded Germany from any role, and that didn't work out too well. And we also acquiesced in the Bolsheviks' self-exclusion, which also didn't work out too well. So they wanted to include China in the global system, in effect, make it part of the governing council of the world rather than outside threatening. And that worked. And in order to do that, in the Shanghai Communique, which is a very unusual document, it begins with 5 or 6 pages, which I remember interpreting to this day, of violent disagreements between the United States and China over everything from what was going on in Indochina at the time, to Korea, to Japan's role in Asia, to Kashmir. We didn't agree about anything. We had to state that for a very obvious reason, that all of our friends, Chinese friends and our friends, were concerned that we might sell them out. By dramatizing our differences, we demonstrated we weren't. And that enabled us to go on and say, notwithstanding all these differences and the different socioeconomic systems in the two countries, there are some things we can cooperate on. And among those is blocking an effort by anyone to achieve hegemony. Anyone in this case meaning the Soviet Union, with maybe Japan also there as a historical memory. So that was a very effective way of defanging the normal American impulse to insist that everybody conform to our values. We just set it aside. And we're not doing that. After the end of the Cold War, there was a mood in this country which refuted President Kennedy's remark. I remember one occasion he said, if I make a mistake in domestic policy, it can embarrass me. But if I make a mistake in foreign policy, we could all die. And there was a sense of consequence about foreign policy. It meant that you didn't screw around with it. You were careful. You didn't assert special interests, vested interests. You tried to assert a national interest. That disappeared after the Cold War. We were full of ourselves. And we thought, foreign policy, yeah, who cares? So we started foreign policy by franchise. So the Black Caucus got Haiti for no reason other than that Haitians are African descent. The Save the Whales crowd got Norway because Norway, Wales, and the non-proliferators got the Soviet and ex-Soviet Union, and so forth and so on. And with China, we did multiple franchises. Religious freedom, human rights, the trade issues, this, that, and it all got very confused. And if you don't have an effective structure of government that can take all of these disparate interests, which are real and need to be attended to, and somehow synthesize them and come up with a national vision, then you get the kind of confusion we now have. So I think this is an evolution in our polity that is not complete yet, and it makes it very, very difficult for anybody to deal with us because they don't know where we're coming from. Yes, ma'am.
About traditional diplomacy.
I don't think your mic is working.
You have spoken about traditional diplomacy issues that we have all lived through. My husband was a 40-year Foreign Service officer. But today, the planet is burning. We have to turn the temperature down. And none of these issues, in my mind, is as important as how we're going to save planet Earth. What would you say?
I'd agree with that. But I'd also say that with great difficulty and probably unconstitutionally, the Obama administration agreed to the Paris Climate Accord. This is not a problem that can be tackled by a single country. It requires the cooperation of all. China actually, in many ways, has been doing a lot more than the United States. Of course, it very quickly became a larger polluter than the United States. But it is making real progress in cutting that back. I think it's positively criminal to suspend cooperation on this issue. One of the reasons I try to stress science and technology a bit is not only because I believe that free exchange of ideas is the key to our national greatness. We were always open to ideas and people. And if we become closed to ideas and people, that hurts us more than it hurts anybody else. So I believe that. But another reason is I see a great deal more interest in superheroes than I do in science. Fantasy. In this country. The fact that more Americans are not taking up STEM work is a symptom of a national mood that's gone off in a more kind of less scientific, less technologically oriented direction. And in that kind of atmosphere, climate denial can exist, and it does. And, it's the official position of the Trump administration that it's a hoax. And they are actually preventing government departments from writing scientific reports that document climate change. And yet I sit in Rhode Island at the house where I was a little kid back in the mid-40s, and I can see that the water level in the bay is a foot higher than it was. Something's happening. Do we have time for...
We have time for one more question.
Sir.
Sir, in the South China Sea,
Yeah.
man-made islands are being built by the Chinese.
Right.
They're kind of taking over the whole area, and this is what has been called in some periodicals the shadow war, in the sense of taking command without ever firing a weapon. Is there any reality to that? Since America is just sitting by and watching.
Those islands in the South China Sea and the South China Sea itself, in the pre-modern period, when Chinese and other Asians did not endorse the European idea of sovereignty. Sovereignty in the European concept applies to land and territory. In the Asian concept, what mattered was whether there were people there and what allegiance they had. There were no people there. So this was a no man's land. It was a no man's land through most of the 20th century. And then things changed. Why? Because the law of the sea treaty was being negotiated, and people thought they could get seabed resources by claiming these rocks and reefs and islands. So it all began with a guy named Tomas Loma, a very fine Filipino lawyer in Manila, who in the mid-1950s looked out at the Spratly Islands and saw that there was nobody there. And so he went out and asserted a claim on behalf of a new country called Freedom Land, the only purpose of which was to issue postage stamps, which he made a fortune on. And in 1972, the late Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator of the Philippines, jailed him and at bayonet point forced him to transfer all of his rights, whatever they were, to the Philippine government. That's the origin of the Philippine claim. 1978, the Malaysian military went and seized 5 islands. There are 48 Vietnamese outposts there. The Chinese in 1987, after all this had happened, belatedly reacted. I think what they did was 2 things. First, like in a game of Go, Weiqi, where you place stones to break and encircle them, and to establish a presence that can't be dislodged, they went and took 7 islands and enlarged them. And being Chinese, when they enlarge things, they make it really large. Vietnamese and Filipinos have been doing that before, but on a small scale. So that's the first thing. we're here, you can't throw us out. Our claim, which dates, Chinese claim dates at least a century back, more than that actually, 1914 was the first map showing the claim. We're here, you can't throw us out. Nobody can throw them out. The second purpose is, if you look at Chinese history, for 600 of the last 1,000 years, China was ruled by foreigners. And foreigners, the last 500 years, came right through that area. This is a picket line out there, in the military sense, not the trade union sense. Warning. You know, if you're coming at me, I'm going to find you, I'm going to see it, and I'm going to stop it. The United States has no claim at all to these islands. We never claimed them when we were in the Philippines as the colonial power. They're not off our shore. So I find it really quite remarkable that we've managed to achieve the level of hysteria about this at the end. It's very dangerous. As I said, we could get ourselves into a war over this. I don't think the American people want to fight over a bunch of sandbars in the South China Sea. So, you know, before you start a war, you ought to be confident that you can sustain it. And you also ought to have a war termination strategy. Where does this end if we get into a war? Are we going to annex those islands? Put Marines on them? I don't think so. So I think we need to think this through a little more soberly than we've done. This is a lot of testosterone being burned at sea as people go at each other.
Thank you very, very much.